Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
This is the Forum in Inglewood, California, the site of the 8th annual Major Indoor Soccer League All-Star Game. The greatest players in indoor soccer meet next.
For me, being this game is a translation how my team and myself is playing this season. I'm real happy to be here because I represent my players in Dallas, and I hope I'll have a great game.
Hi, these are the kind of games I look forward to, meeting guys like Zungul and Bronco. You know, it's a challenge to myself and to a lot of players to see these kind of guys come at you and fire balls at 40, 50, 60, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. But it's a chance for me to show my skills and hopefully can stop them. And I think to be the year of the East.
The reason I like to play in the MISL All-Star Game is to play with my good friend Steve Jungle.
I'm happy to be here in All-Star Game, my 7th, and I'm enjoying to share the moment with the crowd and my old teammates.
ESPN and Bud Sports present the 1987 Major Indoor Soccer League All-Star Game. Top stars in the East meet the best in the West. The All-Star Game is being brought to you by Budweiser, the genuine article. Beechwood aged for that clean, crisp taste that makes Budweiser the king of beers. For all you do, this Bud's for you. By Metropolitan Life and affiliated companies. Get Met, it pays. And by the 1987 German-engineered Volkswagen in your Volkswagen dealer.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hello. How are you doing, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon, as you know by now. This is Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports, which you hopefully know by now. Thank you for finding us. Appreciated greatly, and welcome back to the festivities as we follow the bouncing red rocket ball on the green AstroTurf of the Major Indoor Soccer League from the late 70s through the 1980s and the very early part of the 1990s, the first original version of MISL soccer. And we are pleased to have back on our microphones Tim O'Brien, who is a repeat guest from earlier episodes that you just might have missed. In particular, number 31, where we talk about his co-writing of the book, Make This Town Big, which is the excellent story of the Wichita Wings of the MISL. And episode number 151, which he helped inspire, called God Save the Wings, which was the discussion about the documentary film that the book begat. And Tim is back after a long absence, and luckily so for us, to come back and discuss his new project. And again, circling around the great MISL, it's a new series of articles that just launched and that you and myself can enjoy for free, at least for the time being. And it is found at this location. It's MISL 1980s, 1980s, MISL1980s.substack.com. And Tim is rolling out the stories. He's been spending the last number of years doing interviews and having conversations with various people and stories related to the great Major Indoor Soccer League, and lots of names to be dropped in this conversation coming up in just a bit. Lots of memories to be circled around, and many good, fuzzy, warm especially hot winter nights memories to be had in this conversation and in this series. And we look forward to bringing it to you in a few moments' time. But again, I highly recommend the book, Make This Town Big. We'll have a link to it again on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 336. We'll also have a link to the Substack as well. And you can also, by the way, find a convenient link to the movie, which is now, I think, available on Amazon Prime and a couple of other places. And that's also the website there is godsavethewings.com. So all that kind of stuff is there for you to enjoy and revel in, and to hopefully get you set for this chat. Let's set it up a little bit further, shall we? The clip kind of gives you a little bit of a hint of sort of where we're headed. That clip was from ESPN back in 1987. That was one of the years where ESPN was bringing you MISL games, games of the week. I think they had about, 15 to 18 games that season. Longtime fans of the MISL in the original first years may remember the USA Cable Network with Al Troutwig and Kyle Rote Jr. calling all of the action, being sort of the earliest place for national cable broadcasts of MISL games. But that was the all-star game that was in the fabulous forum, still around, but not for sports anymore. And that was what I think the date was specifically February the 11th of 1987. Perhaps maybe one of the best, if not the best, all-star games ever played in the MISL. The Eastern Division beating the Western Division by a 6-5 score in sudden death overtime. And just great names. A tattoo you heard in that setup. Tino Lettieri was the second voice you heard in that. Bronco Segota was the third voice. And the great Lord of all indoors, Steve Jungle, was the final player in that little setup. And of course, the irrepressible and unmistakable dulcet tones of JP Dellacamera, our episode number 66 guest, calling the action that game alongside, although you didn't hear his voice, Seamus Mallon, the longtime color commentator for Cosmos games, you remember those, as well as MISL games on ESPN. So many memories right there, but that sets the tone for our conversation. So let's get to it, shall we? It is with our pal Tim O'Brien. It's really great to have him back. And let's get into the origin story of this Substack series devoted to the various hijinks around the MISL. Here's our conversation we had just a few weeks back. Please, as always, enjoy. Why don't you give our esteemed audience a bit of an update since your last appearance here on this show back in 2017? Where are you? Are you still in the Wichita area? And maybe we can then sort of skate into sort of the origin story of your original interest in the MISL in the first place, which obviously from past conversations centered around those crazy wings.
Absolutely. Make This Town Big. The story of Roy Turner and the Wichita Wings is still it's available on Amazon.
A fun book and one of the best reads about the MISL. Frankly, there aren't too many of those, but this tells two stories in one. Really, it's the Wings story, but also a lot about what this MISL thing was all about at that time. So sorry, I didn't mean to digress, but it's imploring the audience to get this book because it's great.
Yeah, it was a labor of love. It was, and we decided to use the sort of oral history format when we wrote the book. Mike Romalis and I were the authors, and because we wanted to. There's so many great stories from all these participants that we interviewed, and I had just read. These guys have all the fun, the ESPN book. I may have butchered the title, but something along those lines. And it used that oral history format where it just lets the different figures from ESPN's history talk. And so we decided this would be a great format for the Wings book, because we had gazillion interviews with all these former, players and coaches and staff and media and all that. But so yeah, but we almost sold 1,000 copies of this book about indoor soccer in Wichita in the 1980s, which is some sort of miracle that, I really did not expect that to happen, because it's such a niche thing. And that led into, because then we're like, well, we really want people to see what this looks like. And so we hooked up with Adam Knapp and Kenny Lynn, and we're later joined by Tori Deathridge, another producer, and we made God Save the Wings, the documentary film about the Wichita Wings. And that film is now available on Amazon on Prime Video. You can rent it or purchase it on Prime, and it's only like $2.99 to rent, so it's a pretty cheap price. It's definitely worth $2.99 for that hour and a half. And you can also, we also are selling DVDs and Blu-rays on GodSaveTheWings.com. So we've had a lot of great sales so far for both those things. So it's been a great experience, and it was, it took us it was a 3-year process of making the film, which we learned as we went to film festivals all over the world. We learned that we'd run into filmmakers that were like, "Oh, my film took 8 years," so we actually made it quickly in the documentary film community. But so yeah, it's been a real. We went to Berlin and Spain and Denmark and all over the United States, and the film has won awards at 3 different festivals, Best Documentary, Audience Awards as well. So it's been a great journey.
Well, before we get into your new project, why don't you also remind us, and by the way, episodes number 31 and episode number 151, for those folks who are relatively new to the show, check both of those out, because that was our first conversation with Tim, that first episode 31, and then the Wings movie with Adam and Mike Morales from 2020. Check both of those out, because you'll sort of get the fuller picture of this Wings story. But for those who either don't remember or haven't listened to those yet, give our audience a bit of a background on your learning of your connection to this Wings franchise. What, when, how, and maybe more importantly, why?
So if you were a child growing up in the 1980s in Wichita, Kansas, you almost certainly were a Wings fan, or at least you knew who the Wings were, and you maybe went to a game or two, or saw a game, or maybe had a shirt. So it was a huge deal in Wichita in the 80s. And so I was in elementary school during the Wings sort of heyday in the early mid 80s. And so I went to a handful of games. I'd watch it on TV. I had an Eric Rasmussen jersey. I wouldn't say I was really a super fan, but I was definitely a fan, and I played soccer probably because of the Wings, really. And so that brought me to the Wings, just like many kids in Wichita. But as an adult, I became friends with a guy named Mike Morales, who had really the Wings had really been the defining thing of his childhood. And he was an obsessive collector of all things Wings, and still is. And so we became friends over in high school, actually, and then in college at University of Kansas. We went there together. And I ended up at one point, he was my roommate in adulthood, and he would, have this collection of Wings DVDs that he had. He had originally got them, a VHS tapes, and then he had converted them to the DVDs, and he had a massive collection of these games. And so we'd occasionally watch one and, sort of speculate about what if the Wings came back? And then in 2011, after the Wings had been defunct since 2001, a very rich man here in Wichita, Wink Hartman, who is an oil man, maybe a billionaire or almost a billionaire. He's a 100 millionaire, we'll call him. He decided to bring the Wings back. And so I got into it in a way that kind of Mike got into it when he was a kid. I really started getting into this new version of the Wings, and then, developed relationships with some of the people, sort of other fans, and then, met Roy Turner. And then, Mike and I were like, why don't we just write a book about this? Actually, we had a friend who suggested this. And so we set up a meeting with Roy Turner, the great coach and of the Wings. Also, he was a president of the Wings after he was the coach. And of course, he had been the Iron Man of the NASL and the Dallas Tornado back in the 70s. And so that process, led us, through Roy, we were able to get access to all these different players and different figures and from Wings history. And there was this huge desire amongst both the players and the people involved with the team and the fans to see this history remembered. And, we had a book launch party in Wichita, and there were hundreds of people there. And it was, we brought in a bunch of the former players, Chico Borja, Andy Chapman, Kim Runfed, Kevin Cooley, Victor Moreland, missing a couple, but Terry Nickel. And it was an enormous event. And so that then led to the movie. And the same thing happened with the movie, where this, the fan base funded our film, which was it was not a cheap process, because we flew to Denmark, we flew to England, we went various places in the United States, interviewing different people. And, we have animation in God Save the Wings, and it's not cheap. And so the whole process, it was, tens of thousands of dollars, all funded by Wings fans. They funded this entire project, and because they wanted to see this history kept alive. And so I kind of accidentally fell into all this, just from being a casual fan as a kid to then, becoming one of the what they call Punish, professional underground network of indoor soccer historians, I believe is the acronym they like to use. Rich Pichette and Alan Balthrop and Brian Holland, who are all super fans, along with Mike Malice of the MISL.
So describe to me why the Wichita fan base sort of rallied around both these two projects. And I'm guessing a whole lot of it had to do with the fact that this was, for all intents and purposes, aside from minor league hockey or minor league baseball and various forms of less than indoor football and stuff, this was literally major league for the first time for this city in the middle of Kansas. No?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, the MISL, for those who don't know, was a big deal in the 1980s. And you had NFL teams that owned franchises. You had the Lasers, owned by Jerry Buss, who owned the Lakers. It was a, large markets, New York, LA, Dallas, Chicago. And so this was on ESPN, on a USA Network at various times. So this was a big deal. And then, Wichita is in this league. And, when we interviewed the owners, in particular, Bill Oliver, who just passed away, actually, a former owner of the team, he was like, I didn't want to own a team that played against, Dubuque, and nothing against Dubuque, or, Tulsa or whatever. He wanted to play against New York and LA. He wanted to see Wichita's name um, on that same marquee as those big cities. And this was Wichita's only chance, really, in any form to compete on the same level as these major cities. And so because of that, and because of the personalities of many of these foreign players that came to Wichita, Andy Chapman, this kid from the East End of London, just the most charming guy you'll ever meet. And, he charmed the pants off of many fans, literally and figuratively, here in Wichita. And people like, Eric Rasmussen, who's and the rest of the Danes, Jurgen Christensen, who came in and were just spectacular talents, and Chico Borja, was just beloved. And so people really embraced this as Wichita's, opportunity to compete against the largest cities in the country and appear in sports pages all over this country. Wichita versus, the New York Arrows or the LA Lasers or the Dallas Sidekicks or whatever it may be. This opportunity, for a small city like Wichita, which, at the time in the 80s was, 250,000 people. This is not something that is that the people here took lightly. And because the Wings were in the community, they visited my elementary school. They visited, every elementary school in the city. And just were these Pied Pipers for soccer. And, that really made it's very special here in town. And you could meet these guys and you could go out and see them at the bar or, it was a very open environment, in the sense that they were very available for fans, which, was hard for some players to deal with because, they weren't necessarily used to having that kind of having fans have that kind of access to them. But Mike Dowler says, he'd have people come to see him at a restaurant. They'd walk up to him at a table in a restaurant with his wife and ask for an autograph, and his wife would say, yes, he can give you an autograph, but would you mind letting him finish his dinner first? And so, it was a big deal for the people of Wichita to have this major league sport here in town.
How did Wichita get on the radar in the first place, right? I know the MISL was relatively fledgling at the time. I mean, Wichita joined the league in its second year. Remember, we have to remember there were only 6 teams that first year. How do they leap onto the radar when people like Earl Foreman, and our previous guest, Ed Tepper, co-founders of the league, were obviously hustling as much as they could to get as many major league cities and arenas into the group? How does Wichita get on their radar? And more importantly, how does Wichita make the cut?
Wichita, there was a guy in Wichita named Tom Marshall who had arranged to bring the Dallas Tornado into Wichita for a exhibition at the Kansas Coliseum, which is where the Wings would eventually play. And they actually had 2 exhibitions that they did with NASL teams. And that sort of was the beginning of this idea of, okay, maybe we can have our own team in Wichita. And so Marshall and Jackie Knapp, who recently passed away, they reached out to the league because they had, were aware of, this new league was starting, MISL, and worked to find investors. And it was, it was a difficult process, because finding that kind of money, was not necessarily an easy thing. And eventually Bob Becker, who's an oil man, who was from here in Wichita and who had invested in other things, some films in Hollywood and other projects, they hooked up with him and were able to convince the league. They had the money, and so the league was like, well, there's enthusiastic fan base, so they got the money, so let's give them a shot. And it didn't take very long for the Wings to really hit it, pretty big in Wichita. It wasn't immediate, but even though the original ownership group actually decided to back out at the end of the first season, the thing that really made the Wings successful was they were then purchased by a group that was led by Frank Carney, who was one of the co-founders of Pizza Hut and from Wichita. And so Frank Carney then brought in Bill Kittling to run the team as a GM. And of course, Bill later went on to become the commissioner of the Major Indoor Soccer League in the mid '80s and mid to late '80s. And so it was and then it took off after Carney took over even more than it had the first season, and the Wings were having some success on the field as well, making the playoffs multiple years in a row, and so they just took off.
The arena though was also new around that time too. The Kansas Coliseum, no longer there, affectionately or maybe derisively referred to as the Big Brown Barn. That was I only recently discovered that arena only came online in 1977, and the Wings started in '79. So I had to think that there were some dynamics there about trying to fill the Coliseum with content.
Yeah, it was relative. Yeah, it was pretty new arena. The Wings shared it with the Wichita Wind, which was a minor league hockey team for a while, and the Wind didn't last that long. But it was 9,800 and some capacity, so a little small in the MISL comparatively to some of the other arenas, but very raucous. It was very loud. Just the acoustics of that place were very loud. And it wasn't a beautiful building, but it was. It still stands, but it is no longer an arena. It is actually run. It's an aviation research is done there. So literally, there are planes in the Kansas Coliseum, Wings in the Kansas Coliseum again. This time, literal wings. And but yeah, that arena was a great place to watch a soccer game, and it was really loud, and so it made it a great environment, especially when you filled it all up to the brim with screaming people in orange.
And we'll segue to the broader project that you're into in a minute, but I do, for anybody who watched those games in the early years on the USA cable network, in particular, Al Troutwig behind the mic, often with Kyle Rote Jr., previous guest on this show. Anytime a game was coming to you from the Kansas Coliseum, you knew that it was going to be loud and boisterous. And it came through on the TV set. It did feel a little different. It felt very different, right? Especially when it was, even if it was only, 3/4 full, there was an intimacy there that, save for, St. Louis Steamers selling at the Checker Dome, it's a whole different story. There was definitely a vibe there of, you knew that the town, if you will, was coming out to support the team. This was different because it was Major League, like the book's name implies, make this town big, and the fact that it was kind of I think you've said this on a previous occasion, sort of a Green Bay Packers sort of dynamic, a la the NFL, right? Sort of the small market team versus the big cities, and there's certainly an extra dynamic of fandom that comes along with that, whether you're a Wichita native or, frankly, in a market maybe that didn't even have an MISL franchise, somebody you could root for pretty easily.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because Wichita, Kansas, let's say not the most sophisticated city in the MISL. It's the Midwest and a reputation for being that sort of Midwestern kind of thing. And yet the Wings play this beautiful European soccer, this very precise, one touch, passing, beautiful soccer. And, the biggest rival is the Steamers, who are this American team. And so every time the Steamers and the Wings played, it was this sort of, these European stylish, extremely skilled pros versus the rugged Americans who were physical. And it really, they both teams, especially St. Louis, played up this, this idea of let's beat these foreigners, with their goalkeeper, of course, accepted, in St. Louis. But other than him, they had a lot of native St. Louis guys, and so that really added to the atmosphere in that rivalry. Was that sort of really contrast between the styles of play of the Wings and the Steamers and a few other teams that were kind of that physical.
So tell me how the fans of Wichita gravitate to this league writ large, right? Because this is something that's a special thing to the fans of Wichita for major league reasons. So by extension, right, they've got to be big boosters of this entire league too, to ensure that this thing goes bigger and bolder than it was in the first couple of years. I'm just wondering, what this league was like in terms of people's fandom. And were they into it? Did they be converted? Were they soccer fans, or was it just an event that they had to go to?
It started out as, a lot of these people were not sports fans at all, or especially not soccer fans. Some were fans of football and basketball, your traditional American sports, and who came to the Wings. But then, because there was so much at stake, because this was such a big deal for Wichita, all of a sudden, this fan base just develops very quickly and really cares about this, because they know this is important for Wichita, and they like the feeling that we're a part of something big that's national, and we're not only a part of it, we're successful at it. And so you find people in Wichita who were, watching a lot of people were watching the, MISL game of the week on USA or eventually ESPN. They were following the league as a whole because, if you're in New York, I mean, you've got lots of entertainment options. And if the Arrows go away, well, there's other things to follow. But if the Wings go away, this is a big deal for the city. And so, there are people here, who are collecting MISL stuff, not just Wing stuff. They became not necessarily fans of other teams, but they would watch these other teams, and then you sort of became knowledgeable about the game. But, there weren't very many blue blood soccer people here in Wichita until the Wings. I mean, there were both in the Hispanic community. It was a soccer team. It was a semi-pro team, outdoor team that played, and there was another local team that produced some people that tried out for the Wings. But the soccer community was really small. It was, but because the MISL was the vehicle for Wichita's pride and joy, it became important. And the owners, like Bill Oliver, who I mentioned earlier, it was important to them to own a team that was playing against the biggest cities. And when the MISL folded and the Wings joined the NPSL, some of those owners were like, I'm not interested in it anymore, because, I'm not interested in playing Dayton. Nothing against Dayton, but it's, because, I mean, we're from Wichita, for God's sakes. But it became less interesting to some of those people after the MISL folded.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sports wear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. Tell me about sort of what you've been kind of focused on doing lately, because there's more to this MISL story. I think you and I have traded notes, and I've certainly traded notes with a ton of folks inside and outside of the old MISL, that there's with a few exceptions, right? Your movie and book, the former owner of the Denver Avalanche, not the Colorado Avalanche, but the Denver Avalanche team for a couple of years there, and a few other, Ed Tepper, we had a great conversation with, a few other sort of nibbles and stuff. There's a real missing link, if you will. There's no MISL documentary. There's no definitive book on, the history and the times, the narrative kind of approach that you took with your book for the Wings for this league. And to me, it's surprising. I got a note just out of the blue on Twitter/X about 2 years ago from Roger Bennett. He won half of the Men in Blazers. And he somehow found me and was asking, where can I find MISL footage? Because we had a couple of conversations about some of that stuff. And I haven't heard from him since, but it is just sitting there waiting for the ESPN 30 for 30 or better treatment.
The whole time we were making God Save the Wings, the documentary film, we kept looking over our shoulder, expecting ESPN to come out with a 30 for 30 about the league. Thinking, we're going to spend all these years, 3 years working on this, and then they're going to, throw a bunch of money at a MISL project and come out first. I mean, maybe that's silly for us to have thought that way, but that's because we knew how great of a story this was, the league and the Wings, but the league in general as well. And it is absolutely remarkable that in this age of 80s nostalgia, that no one has made this MISL movie yet. That, no one has really written a definitive history of the MISL. And so the last several years, I was working on my master's degree in journalism at the Extension School at Harvard University. And I had been writing about all different kinds of things. I had sort of decided to do this to get my master's because I had been sort of committing these acts of journalism, writing a book and producing this documentary film. And so in my last class, which was the capstone class, I had my professor was a wonderful journalist named Kurt Pitzer, and I was, I needed to produce a series of long form stories. And I said, what if I wrote about the MISL and the Wichita Wings? And remarkably, he was he happened to be a soccer fan, so he was familiar with the MISL. But his first question was, "Are you sure you want to write about this?" And so, I wrote several stories for this capstone, and as I was doing that, I realized, I really want to make a bigger project out of this. And at first, I thought about a book, and I think it would be wonderful if someone were to write a definitive history of the MISL. It's just such a huge, enormous project to do what we did for the Wichita Wings for the entire league is, it's like a 1,000-page book. And I wasn't quite.
It's also a template, right? Maybe for others who might want to do something similar, including the league.
Yeah, and so what I thought then was, what I'll do instead is I'll write, at first it was going to be a book, but then it turned into a Substack. I'll write this, series of stories about the MISL, not trying to tell the entire story of the league, but trying to take pieces of it, important pieces of it, really interesting pieces of it, and then write about those pieces. And, snippets here and there of this, it was a 14-year history of the league. There's a lot of history there to write about. And so, I started this Substack, MISL 1980s, and it's the story MISL 1980s, the story of indoor soccer, and it's which is free to read. Eventually, I'm going to convert it to paid, but right now it's free, and basically, I wanted to kind of in 1,000-word slices, every week, tell this story, this pretty remarkable story of the MISL, and not only for the people that already know about the MISL, but especially the first several weeks of the Substack is really designed to be read by people who don't know the league at all or very little, because it's a story that I think will appeal to the younger soccer fans today, and just people who are interested in the history of cultural history and not just sports, but of something that really it burned really bright in the United States for a number of years, and it's just it's a story that's undertold. It's hard to find. Rich Bichette's book, Hot Winter Nights, is really one of the only. You mentioned the Denver Avalanche book. That's the end of the list, like that I know of other than Make This Town Big, of books that are focused on the MISL. I don't know. Do you know of any others?
Off the top of my head, no. And I could see where you want to get some of these original stories sort of out there, because clearly that could be the grist for something that you could cobble together, or with input from readers and maybe conduits to other people and conversations to further have. You can kind of maybe wikyize, if you will, what is or have crowdsourced, frankly, some of your some of the rest of the stories that can maybe lead up to something more comprehensive, either in written or perhaps someday, God forbid, in documentary form.
Yeah, and I've already started to reach out to some guest writers for this Substack who will, put in a story here and there to supplement what I'm doing and tell these, pieces of this story and not try to tell not try to tell every story or tell the it in complete detail, but it's a story that it deserves. The MISL deserves creative nonfiction writing. It deserves feature stories. It deserves to be celebrated and to be digged into. And the digging process has been fascinating. And honestly, Good Seats Still Available has been a great source for what I'm doing because, Tim, you have, interviewed a lot of MISL figures. Some people sort of more tangentially related to the MISL, but others were key figures. Ed Tepper and the bus and all the many different figures you've interviewed from the MISL history. These, I found a lot of really good material and was able, trying to take some of that source material and put it all together in one place, quoting things like that, and also then going back and of course interviewing people myself as well, and but it's also important to go back into in the past and look at the original reporting that was done at the time, and because so much of this history of the MISL is in danger of being lost to the sands of time. And human beings are not very reliable narrators of the past because memory is so finicky and it is not perfect. And it is very important to have, these first person sources as part of that story. And then I go back and I look at some of these, the reporting that was done at the time. And because what we learned with the movie, with God Save the Wings, was oftentimes people, would romanticize or even stigmatize the things that happen in their memories. And we discovered that when, the sort of climax of God Save the Wings is the 81 Steamers Wings playoff semifinal game in St. Louis, and
brutal and still raw to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Roy Turner and Kevin Cooley said they didn't want to watch it. They didn't want to look at it again. They hadn't seen it since, and we thought about trying to film them watching it. They were like, "No, thank you," and it's very painful for them still. But what we realized was that a lot of the sort of memories of the participants were not necessarily directly related to the things that actually happened. There were some sort of misremembering of things, and so we kind of show some of that in the film. And but this is just human, human error that is just natural,
Yeah, that's the danger, right, of oral histories, right? And a lot of this, since the format of this show has been from day one conversational, right? I guess the goal isn't necessarily historical accuracy as much as it is anecdotal and an unearthing of things that maybe were not in any of the literature or the history books, or in those contemporaneous reports in from newspapers and magazines at the time, and unwittingly, and maybe over time, you get to so many conversations that they will sort of overlap and sort of create this weave where most of the facts sort of get surfaced or challenged or burnished, right, over time. And I don't know. I mean, that implies I knew what the hell I was doing 7 years ago. But.
Well, and this is in no way a criticism of what you do, because what I'm trying to do here is it is absolutely vital to have those anecdotes and have those first person narratives. It is absolutely, and it is the most interesting part of any piece about the MISL is, talking to these people about what they experienced. And so, that, from like moments in your podcast, from these guys who really lay out truths out there that, maybe they might not have said 30 years ago, but like, time both is an impediment in the sense that, people's memories are faulty, but at the same time, it also brings a little honesty to the conversation that you might not have gotten 30 years ago when you interview these guys, and now they're willing to maybe be a little bit more candid about what happened. We discovered that with Eric Rasmussen in as you guys will see when you read the Substack. I have a story about Eric, and he's extremely honest about some things that happened, and so you have to interweave both this, original sort of reporting from that time with these narratives that are from today, and those things together. If you leave one out and then don't do the other one, you're missing out on a part of it. And so, the podcast has been absolutely vital for what I'm doing, because it provides so much of that. In addition to the interviews I do myself. So yeah, it is so important to have all those things together to really, and knowing that we're never going to get to the full truth of everything. It's just not possible to do that, but you could just keep trying to get closer to what we think happened, and you have differing ideas of what happened oftentimes, and so, but that's just part of human life.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your thoughts on sort of where we've been and maybe someday where we're going. Give our audience a sense of some of the initial topics that you gravitated to
Sure.
that are going to be part of the Substack stuff, and maybe a little hint or two about, what they can expect in your writing of those.
Well, I was particularly interested in the early sort of both the conception and then the birth of the MISL. And so one of the pieces is about the 1974 Red Army versus Philadelphia Adams game. That was kind of what I think it is. The consensus is this was the conception of indoor soccer as a potential league.
Oh, I would go out on a limb and say, mostly from our conversation with Ed Tepper, that is absolutely true.
I mean, sure, the NASL had tournaments prior to that, indoor tournaments, and yes, there was five-a-side soccer in Europe as mostly a training, in training and practice. But that story was fascinating to me. And Al Miller was and Ed were my two big sources for that. And they, in addition to, I went back and I looked at all this original reporting and found, by the way, some really cool stories from Peter King, for instance, is a source of some of the material in that particular article. The Sports Illustrated, former Sports Illustrated great sports writer Peter King, and this guy named Bill Lyon, who was a Philadelphia Inquirer sports columnist, just has these great. In fact, I have this quote from him that I pulled out of one of his stories. It says, indoor soccer, as it turns out, offers as much action as a Saturday night stroll through Central Park right after the Muggers have thrown out the first body of a new season. Which, it's an example of, there's this like really bright, vivacious, exciting writing, by some of these other journalists who are reporting on what's happening. And so I like to pull that stuff out and bring it to into what I'm writing. And so yeah, the 1974 Red Army versus Philadelphia Adams game, which came about because of a just like random and this was my opportunity to make a reference to Jurassic Park in one of my stories of the the butterfly effect of all of a sudden this Portuguese soccer impresario who happens to have the contract for Red Army Moscow gets in touch with Al Miller in Philadelphia, and then all of a sudden, a few years later, we have the MISL. I mean, and there was some great reporting and stories from that process of getting the Red Army team over here and what happened. And so then I have another story that really delves into sort of like what happened between 1974 and 1978 that led to this league. So I have a long story about how the league, Ed Tepper and Earl Foreman sort of get started, and Doug Verb, who was the PR director for the MISL, is a great source, and he was did a great job in your podcast, and then
all 3 hours and change of it. Yes.
Oh yeah, he's just and he was a journalist himself.
We could have done 12 hours with Doug.
He's a great storyteller. He's very funny, and we interviewed him for the book as well. And so he was a wonderful, source of all this information, and so we really go into all the way up through that. It goes up through that first game with Pete Rose coming out, and Pete Rose had you can see why the league really brought him out and wanted him to talk to the media, because he had this folksy charm where he, like, one of his quotes, he's comparing, he's talking about how people compare indoor soccer to a pinball game, and he says, hey, that the pinball business is about number 2 in this country. You can't get into them pinball parlors. And so he's just like folksy charm that, people love. And so we kind of tell that story all the way up through that first game of the MISL. And that was there's just a lot to tell in that story about, how this league gets started. And there's a couple themes that really reappear when I was doing the research, which is, one, the MISL was really focused on American players. At least that was the marketing. Is that when they wanted American players to have a shot. And I asked Ed Tepper, was this just marketing, or was this, did you really? and he said, yeah, we really wanted to give American players a shot, and I believe him. And of course, as it all turns out, the Americanization of this indoor soccer was never quite happened especially in the early years, and it just wasn't possible. But I think they wanted it to be possible.
Before you go any further, probably because the outdoor league was collapsing, and the MISL, probably beyond even the wildest imaginations of Foreman and Tepper, was becoming the only league professionally in this country, really, of any sort.
Yeah, and the NASL was another theme, was that you can see this before the MISL kicks off, they're very careful in the media about talking about, we don't see ourselves as a competitor with the NASL. We like those guys, and they're trying to play nice because they, of course, realize that there's, it's a scarce. There's the scarce entertainment dollar of the American public is being fought over here, and of course, and you can see that in the press that eventually things get a little testy between the leagues, and it's not so friendly after a while, but yeah, there was some interesting themes that came about from that story, that the birth of the league. And then I really wanted to tell the story of the Dallas Sidekicks championship season, because after talking with Alan Balthrop, who runs kicksfan.com, is a big, he's the sort of the team historian of the Sidekicks. And I thought, this is a really interesting story, partly because the arrows, soccers, I mean, the Arrows and the Sockers were great teams, but sometimes the most interesting stories are, the other part, when somebody else won, which didn't happen a whole lot in the 80s in the MISL. And so that Dallas Sidekicks championship season was something I wanted to write a story about. And I wanted to talk about these members of the professional underground network of indoor soccer historians, the Punish, as they call themselves. These people who realized, if I don't document the history of this MISL team, nobody is going to do it. And they set out to, take on that role. And, there was several of them. I focus on 4 of them in the story, and, talk about what they did and why it meant so much to them. And then I also am telling the story of the New York Express, and which was a very short-lived New York franchise that was not successful. And it's sometimes the failure stories are some of the most interesting stories.
Which is why I think I've had a hard time getting Shep Messing on this show. I think he's a little fearful of maybe talking too much or a little bit about the Express, where I would love to talk more about sort of the origination, him being the, the Gordie Howe to the WHA, he of that of the MISL. He put the league on the map by being the first sort of major signing, and all that kind of heritage and stuff. And he sort of waxes and wanes interest and not interest for his entire career, the outdoor stuff with Cosmos, all that kind of stuff. God forbid someday we'll get him on for just a good, healthy conversation, because I think he's one of the unsung heroes. And that New York Express experience, right, was a noble one, given what had happened to the franchise earlier and the league's desperation, frankly, to be relevant in New York City going forward as the decade was rolling on.
Well, God bless Shep Messing for taking on that, trying to keep. Yeah. I mean, I actually reached out to Shep Messing and I talked to him a little bit, but I haven't been able to get him to talk to me either. But and maybe he's just taken his time to get back to me again. But I think it's an interesting story, and and there's a lot more. The laser story is interesting. I'm gonna tell part of that story, and that's actually something I feel like the lasers ought to be a documentary, a film, just because of the celebrity aspect of it, and it's sort of adjacent to so many interesting things, and even though that they really struggle to get people to come to the games, it's a really interesting story, as you discovered when you did you had 2 podcasts with was Weinstein and Buss, right?
Correct. Yeah. And we still want to get Jeannie on this show too, because she was tangentially related to all that as well. And I want to, I want to find out the real story about why Gabe Kaplan was at the game and being shown on the USA cable network broadcast. And we found out that it was because he was poker buddies with Dr. Jerry.
Yeah, that was funny.
So, okay, when can we start to see this Substack out there? How can people find it? People subscribe to it and all that kind of stuff. And what do you think it will morph into over time if you're lucky?
Well, once this when this episode appears, the Substack will be live. So if you're listening to this now, then you'll be able to go to if you
let's assume we're doing this in a timely fashion. Tim, so go ahead. Let's assume it's available now. Where can people go?
Okay. So yeah, people can go to misl1980s.substack.com. If you just Google MISL 1980s Substack, you'll find it. It's if you're not familiar with Substack, it basically is a sort of email based. So it shows up in your inbox however often. In the case of my Substack, this is a weekly Substack. I've sort of committed myself to 1,000, 1,200 words a week. So every week you'll get another edition of MISL 1980s Story of Indoor Soccer. And I, tell a lot of these stories. It's sort of telling in pieces, part 1, part 2, part 3. So for busy people who, are not able to, it's hard to digest 6,000 words, sometimes of a story. So this gets to people in chunks, and nice little 1,000, 1,200 word chunks to people once a week. And it's an opportunity to learn about the league for people who don't know much about it, and then an opportunity for those who are sort of aficionados of the league to both reminisce and then maybe discover new nuggets about the league and just sort of marinate in this 80s wonderfulness of the MISL, which was like such an 80s story, which, like I said, it's just remarkable to me that it hasn't turned into a documentary or even a sort of a fictional retelling of. I actually know a guy who has written a very famous book, not related to the MISL, who was working on a screenplay that was essentially a MISL television series, believe it or not. And I don't want to say who it is because I don't want him to. I don't know where he is with this project, but I think it would be like it's like what was the wrestling Netflix show that was the fictional version. I can't remember now. Yeah,
The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. Yeah, that's actually a real thing, but then it was fictionalized with Mark Maron.
Yes.
And others. Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing for the MISL, I think, would be fascinating. So if you're a famous Hollywood executive with loads of cash listening to this podcast, then I'm willing to help you out with this. So.
Well, Tim, I'm very much looking forward to this, and look forward to obviously getting this out there and getting people to subscribe and all that kind of stuff. And I actually believe too that you'll find hopefully some community that sort of bubbles up beyond the people that you and I maybe already know or are connected to, right? Who might come out of that proverbial woodwork, God forbid, with some videos that we've never seen, but maybe some stories and maybe some real, energy that perhaps gets rekindled to indeed get some of these bigger projects out, from idea into reality. And maybe you and partially me, maybe I'll be sort of I'll be the key grip, but you could be the executive producer credit on those efforts and stuff. And we'll see if we can enjoy together.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. It was my pleasure to bring that conversation with the other Tim in this chat, Tim O'Brien. Thank you, kind sir, for being with us. And let us remind you that you may get on the list right now by going to MISL 1980s 1980s MISL1980s.substack.com and get yourself in the know to receive all of the missives that Tim O'Brien will be sending with those great stories and interviews and conversations around the old MISL. You can also, by going to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, search up this episode number 336, and you'll find a convenient link to said Substack link if you couldn't write that down fast enough or rewind it quick enough. But you'll also be greeted by a few other links that harken back to some of our previous episodes with Tim. One is the essential history of the Wichita Wings, the book called Make This Town Big. Great read, even if you weren't a fan of the Wings in the MISL. It's a really good primer on what was going on in the league as well as in Wichita. And the movie, which is just a scream, now on Prime, Amazon Prime, and a few other places. I think on Apple too, if I'm not mistaken. That is called God Save the Wings. It's also available, I believe, in the UK version of Amazon Prime as well. And you can find out more about that movie, too, by going to godsavethewings.com. All right, our website, once again, is goodseatsstillavailable.com. All of our episodes are posted there, but of course, the best place and way and manner to get each week's episode of this here little show is to subscribe or follow us wherever you get podcasts. We are available just about wherever you can get them. And for whatever reasons, if your podcast catcher, streamer, whatever it is, doesn't pop it up there for you when you search it up, and you can't subscribe or follow us, let us know, please. We endeavor to make sure that we are as widely available as possible. We're on YouTube as well. You can stream us there. And of course, wherever you can rate and review us, we appreciate that. As you probably know by now, that helps the algorithm. Now increasingly aided and abetted by augmented reality and AI, artificial intelligence. I got to get my my acronym straight, and machine learning and all that stuff. Whatever the technology gods might be doing, do us a favor, will you? And give us some nice ratings and reviews so that we can get ensnared properly into those electronic gears. You can send us email if you'd like. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And you can follow us on various social media. We are on X/Twitter. You will find us at Good Seats Still. And you will find us in various other places like Instagram and Threads and Facebook. You will find us on those places at Good Seats Still Available. Thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you to Jerry Payne of Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Thank you for your knob twiddling, as always, kind sir. And thanks, of course, for listening intently and all the way through this week's episode. We'll see you next week. The appreciation is ours. Take care of yourselves.